Welcome, everyone in the audience tuning in to another iteration of ISDP's Taiwan lecture series. My name is August Borjesson, and I am the acting head of ISDP's Stockholm Taiwan Center. And today, it is really our privilege to be joined by very distinguished scholars for this virtual roundtable discussion on the topic of Yizhou, Liuqiu, and Taiwan in history. So on behalf of the Stockholm Taiwan Center, I would like to sincerely thank you all for joining us today. And before further ado, I will now hand over the word to our chair for this event, because it is really our great pleasure to have with us Professor Emeritus of Chinese Language and Culture at Stockholm University and the former head of ISDP's Stockholm China Center, now a Senior Associate Research Fellow, Professor Torbjörn Lodén.
Thank you very much, August, for your kind words and for inviting me to moderate today's webinar. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is a virtual roundtable at which we will discuss how two islands referred to as Yizhou and Liuqiu in historical sources are related to the Ryukyu Islands and to Taiwan. The discussion will proceed on the basis of the paper Yizhou and Liuqiu in Historical Chinese Texts, International Relations on the Northeast Asian Seas from the 3rd to the 17th centuries. This paper was written for ISDP by Professor Man-houng Lin and her student, Mr. Yi-chen Huang. It is indeed a very great honor and pleasure for me to welcome and to introduce Professor Man-houng Lin as our main speaker today. Unfortunately, Mr. Huang Yi-chen cannot join us.
He will be in the audience.
He will be in the audience. Oh, wonderful.
But a little bit later.
I see.
Yeah.
Professor Lin is a prominent historian and a leading scholar in the world in the field of Chinese history in the late Qing Empire and early 19th century. In this field, she has published profusely, as you can all see from her homepage, to which you can find a link in the announcement of this webinar. And she also often publishes articles on current issues in Taiwanese newspapers. The paper on which this roundtable will be based is also available on ISDP's webpage, and I think Anna Yarmouth has also made it accessible here now. Born in Taiwan, Professor Lin was educated mainly in Taiwan and then at Harvard University, where she obtained her PhD in History and East Asian Languages in 1989. Since 1990, she is a research fellow at the Institute of Modern History at Academia Sinica in Taiwan. And since 1991, she is a professor at the Department of History at National Taiwan Normal University. From 2008 to 2010, she was the first woman president of the Republic of China's Academia Historica. During my time as head of the Stockholm China Center at ISDP, I was introduced to Professor Lin, and I was fortunate to engage her both as a speaker and a writer. During my visit to Taiwan last May, I met her on a couple of occasions and had extremely inspiring conversations with her. And so today I feel especially privileged and happy really to meet you again, Professor Lin, albeit only in cyberspace.
Me too. Yeah.
Thank you. It's also a very great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Evan Dawley, who is a professor of history at Goucher College and who will today be one of Professor Lin's two discussants. In 2006, Professor Dawley completed his PhD in history at Harvard University. His primary research interests relate to modern East Asian history, with particular attention to the histories of Taiwan, China, and Japan, as well as identity formation, imperialism, and international transnational history. He has authored and edited several interesting works, for example, the book Becoming Taiwanese, Ethnogenesis in a Colonial City, 1880s to 1950s, which he published in 2019. His current project, which seems extremely exciting, is titled China, Chinese Abroad, and the Global Construction of the Modern Nation State. Thank you very much, Evan, or Professor Dawley, I should say, perhaps, for agreeing to take part in this roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Our second discussant is Mr. August Börjesson, the main organizer of this event, who is presently, as you know, acting head of the Stockholm Taiwan Center. He holds a bachelor's degree in Chinese language and a master's degree in Asian studies from Lund University in Sweden. He has also studied Chinese language at Beijing Foreign Studies University, as well as international relations at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I know that August is now completing an in-depth study of the diplomatic relations between Sweden and China, a study which I think will be very important in Sweden, at least, in and outside of Sweden. I will now invite Professor Man-houng Lin to talk for about 30 minutes. After that, our discussants will have roughly 10 minutes each for their comments, to which I will invite Professor Lin to respond. Finally, we will also have time for questions and answers. So, ladies and gentlemen, now after these preliminaries, I give the word to Professor Man-houng Lin. Please, Professor Lin.
So please wait for my assistant to upload the PowerPoint.
You have an interesting background photo there. What is that?
Our library.
I
The
see.
library of the Institute of Modern History, Academia Sinica.
I see.
Okay. Thanks for Professor Lodan's long-term friendship, including today's kind remarks about me, and his willingness to be the chair of today's webinar. And thanks also for August facilitating this webinar. And I'm thankful to all of you for giving me this chance to talk about Yizhou, Liuqiu, and Taiwan in history. For Yizhou and Liuqiu, they were ancient islands locally located roughly in the present East China Sea. The navy of the Wu Kingdom, among the three kingdoms in Chinese history, attacked Yizhou in the 3rd century. Its Sui dynasty's navy attacked Liuqiu in the 7th century. They seized the loot and returned without staying to rule. Both islands were deemed Eastern barbarian, Dongyi, in the ancient Chinese text. They were not part of Chinese territory, as the Chinese traditional concept differentiated between barbarians as Yi and Chinese as Xia. For over a century, there has been an academic debate worldwide about whether these two places are Taiwan or Ryukyu. Taiwan is here, and the Ryukyu Islands are around here. The leading French sinologist Delvey started proposing the Taiwan thesis for Ryukyu in 1874. His thesis spread around Europe and was introduced to Japan in the late 19th century. Quite a few early 20th century Japanese scholars endorsed this thesis and accepted the theory that Yizhou was also Taiwan. Japanese sinologist Ichimura identified the 3rd century Yizhou as Taiwan in 1918. Taiwan thesis was then disseminated to the Republic of China and Japanese colonial Taiwan. Taiwan thesis remained dominant for about 3 decades in post-1945. The competing Ryukyu thesis emerged right after the Taiwan thesis came to Japan, but in a low ebb before 1945. With more abundant archaeological and anthropological findings, the Ryukyu thesis became more popular in post-1945 Japan. Some Western proponents also existed during this period. Support for the Ryukyu thesis has existed in Taiwan between the 1960s and 2020s. Related scholars of the PRC mostly accepted the Taiwan thesis. PRC's white paper on unification with Taiwan has Yizhou and Liuqiu at the very beginning to assert Taiwan has been part of China since antiquity. Huang Yi-chen and I revisited this issue and concluded that both places were more likely located in the Ryukyu Islands by applying some essential databases available only today on Chinese or Japanese old text. It is found that the debate tends to mix the latter period's situation with that of the earlier period. One is about the sea route to attack Liuqiu. The other is about the ancient customs of the Aborigines in Taiwan and Liuqiu. What follows is the chart drawn by David for the sea route. The destination was Taiwan. The departure place was Yi'an as A. It passed B and C to isolate respectively in the south and north of Penghu Island Group, west to Taiwan. This is his chart. This is A, B, C, and then Taiwan. David's chart appears as the red line in the following map. On this map, both the A and B lines were drawn from the Book of Sui Shu in the 7th century for the Sui expedition 3 times. Lines C and D were based on later periods accounts for later periods routes between China and Ryukyu. It was only after the 12th century that Penghu served as a transit for the Sino-Ryukyu route, as the D line shows. Here's David's route here in red, and then A line and B line was based upon the Book of Sui, and the C line in black, and then over here, and the D line shows Penghu as a transit in the 12th century. The reason for David's difference is his reference to Ma Duanling's early 13th century work. In Ma's description of the Liuqiu state, he mixes several accounts from the 9th to the 13th century with the Book of Sui's accounts made in the 7th century. As the government of China during the 12th to the 14th centuries set garrisons at Penghu, and Penghu was part of Taiwan since 1683, David deems that Taiwan had a close relationship with China since the 7th century. Then David claims that the Ryukyu custom of eating the dead people's corpse is more similar to indigenous Taiwanese head hunting custom extending up to the 19th century. David deems that the Ryukyu people in his time were closer to the Japanese as they had extreme respect for the dead. Ryukyuans also had air-bearing customs without having a tomb, according to the accounts for their cannibalism. The Book of Sui account for these 2 customs were repeated by a Japanese account based upon some Japanese drifters to the Ryukyu state in the 13th century and a 16th century account from a Chinese envoy to the Ryukyu Kingdom. Eating the dead people's corpse is different from head hunting. On the other hand, Qing China's documents and Japanese investigations around the 1910s show that various Taiwanese aborigines had earth burial in or around their residence. Their recent problems came also from his neglect that Ryukyu was more integrated into intra-Asian exchange network than Taiwan from the 3rd century to the 16th century. Also, Satsuma a Japanese daimyo directly nose to Ryukyu, considerably changed the Ryukyu Kingdom into a de facto Japanese protectorate between 1609 and 1874, when Davey wrote his Taiwan thesis. Let's deal with this after some explanation about Yizhou, for which records were more scanty. The Book of Sui recorded that the Sui Code showed a piece of Ryukyu cross armor brought back by the Sui navies to a Japanese envoy visiting them. The Japanese envoy stated, "The people of the state of Yaku use this." So the state of Yaku was the state of Ryukyu. This Yaku sound appeared in Japan's official histories around the 7th century for places around today's Yaku Island and North Ryukyu. Hence, Yizhou and Liuqiu in Chinese had similar pronunciations in the Ryukyu language. This is the area for the Yaku sound in that period. Some archaeologists point out that the Ryukyuan cultural and economic change during the 3rd century was concentrated in the Amami and Osumi Islands near and adjacent to Kyushu. Okinawa Islands were the southern edge of this trading zone. Ryukyu people provided shares for Japan and China during this period. This is the cultural zone that includes Ryukyu, northern Ryukyu, and the islands between Ryukyu Islands and Kyushu or Japan. They provided shares and in return, they obtained ancient China's currencies. Yizhou, when they were attacked by the Wu Kingdom, the Yizhou expedition's departure place was Linkai. The commander of Linkai Commandery left a direct record for that expedition. The record describes Yizhou is southeast to Linkai. Yi-chen made the following map by applying the historical map drawing database and the Google map about the southeast to the capital of Linkai Commandery. On this map, Ryukyu is east or southeast to it. Here's this area is the Linkai Commandery's area, and the city is here. So southeast to this Linhai's seat is a northern part of northern Ryukyu. Even with the same opinion about the location of Linhai's seat, Yizhou's Taiwan thesis supporters had merely intuitive inferences saying that Taiwan was located southeast to Linhai's seat. With digital help, we know that Taiwan is south to Linhai. Ancient Chinese texts categorize Yizhou under Wu or Dongti, terms primarily referring to Japan or Eastern barbarians extending to Korea. It implies that Yizhou was near to Japan, and Ryukyu was closer to Japan than Taiwan. Yizhou's external exchange relates with our critique of Davey's neglect of the influence of more interaction with the outside world on the changes of the Ryukyu customs. For Ryukyu's external relation, it is worthwhile to refer to Cao Yonghe's viewpoint. He has shown that after the 3rd century, the central axis of Asian exchange shifted to the Northern Silk Road, extending east to the Japanese islands, and the Maritime Silk Road, stretching from the South Asia to Guangzhou. Taiwan and Ryukyu on the declined Kuroshio route were hence peripherized. This is the Northern Silk Road extending to Japan, and this is the Maritime Silk Road extending through South Asia and then to Guangzhou. And then this is the crucial route which covered Taiwan and the Ryukyu Islands. And because of the rise of the Silk Road, this line declined, and so Cao Yonghe say both Taiwan and Ryukyu Islands would be badly affected. Cao's thesis applies to Taiwan, but not to Ryukyu. Ryukyu's external exchange continued after the 3rd century because Japan was still connected to the Northern Silk Road, and that connection was extended to Ryukyu. This is Japan's connection with the Silk Road, and that connection had been extended here, and through the black line, it was extended to here, and here could be extended to Okinawa, and from here it could be extended to Okinawa as well. As archaeological findings reflect, the Ryukyu kept economic and political connections with Japan, China, and the Korean peninsulas during the 3rd century. And at this time, between 3rd century and the 7th century, they provided shares in this shape. And after the 7th century, they provided shares with this style to sustain China and Japan's Rodan artifacts. In return, they obtain a great deal of tang coins. This is the route for the tang coins to have been excavated. You see, there are 2 tiny dots on Taiwan, and there's a string of dots from Okinawa Islands to Japan for the existence of the tang coins. In exchange, the Ryukyu people imported porcelain, stone cookware, and iron implements from China and Japan. Thanks to more active external exchanges, Ryukyu's size and degree of political centralization were more developed than Taiwan's. Wu Chinese deemed Yizhou as some regime ruled by kings. The Book of Trade described the Ryukyu state having defense installations and military organizations with a clear hierarchy. Archaeological findings include some establishments that look like the predecessors of the royal castle, which appeared after the 10th century. This is the royal castle remains. In Taiwan, there have hardly been compatible remains. As late as the 16th century, Chinese records still claim that people in northern Taiwan had no leaders. It was not until the 1630s that Taiwanese village appears alliances and chiefdoms like those in Liuqiu. With the Mongol invasion from the north in the 13th century, Ryukyu's previous northward external relations declined. Yet the Ryukyu thrived with the rise of the pirates from Kyushu during the transition from the 13th century to the 14th century. The Ming founder finds that these pirates united with the anti-Ming force. He not only started a maritime ban, but also established a tribute system, trying to transform the pirate trade into the trade controlled by the Ming government. As the Ryukyu archipelago was a place to moor the pirates, Ming court offered Ryukyu favorable conditions for carrying on the tribute trade. From 1372 to 1404, 3 branches of Ryukyu's smaller kings paid tribute to Ming successively. The Ryukyu Kingdom was established in 1429 when these 3 small kings were unified. The tribute trade was established mainly through the original Sino-Ryukyu route and extended. This is the Sino-Ryukyu route in the Book of Trade, and because of this tribute system, it was extended to Beijing. Ryukyu could pay tribute to China more frequently than other vassal states, and the trade duration could be longer. Hence, many other states had to go through Ryukyu to enter into trade with China. It was on this basis that the Ryukyu Kingdom portrayed itself on its palace bell bridge to the various kingdoms. The forthcoming transshipment of Japanese silver to China also enriched Ryukyu, which has been drawn as the center of the Great East Asia. This is Ryukyu's palace. This is the bell in the palace, and this is the charter for the bridges to various countries. And this is the charter for Naha. This is the center. Here is Naha as the center of the Great East Asia. In the latter half of the 16th century, the Ming Empire gradually lifted its maritime man. Many other countries' merchants re-exported Japan's silver to China. European merchants from the Portuguese, Spain, and the Netherlands came to Southeast Asia and shared Ryukyu's intermediary trade between Southeast Asia and China or Japan. Japan's hold of silver export further hurt the Ryukyu Kingdom. In 1609, Satsuma conquered Ryukyu. Satsuma would replace Ryukyu with a lucrative trade made via Satsuma. Satsuma also would like to reinforce Japan's military outskirts against the Western invasion. Satsuma had Ryukyu maintain dual tributes to both China and Japan. In the first decade of the 17th century, Satsuma succeeded in dominating Ryukyu's government, domestic economy, and external trade. Between 1609 and 1879, Japan took steps to change the Ryukyu Kingdom into the Okinawa Prefecture of Japan. In the 12th century, Taiwan emerged as a navigational landmark when the Penghu line of the Sino-Ryukyu route was opened. Then it turned into a small Ryukyu, relative Ryukyu as a great Ryukyu, as the foreign maps show. Taiwan's external trade had a vivid rise in 1600, in contrast with the vivid decline of Ryukyu in 1609. This is the 1306 map for the differentiation of Ryukyu into the Great Ryukyu and the Small Ryukyu. Taiwan is here, and Liuqiu was here. And this is the 1571 European map for the Great Ryukyu and the Small Ryukyu. Qing Kangxi's successor, the Yongzheng Emperor, said in 1723 that it was not until his father that Taiwan started to become China's territory. Taiwan did not belong to China in ancient times. 1683 was the first time Taiwan came under the rule of Chinese Empire, and the first time Penghu turned under Taiwan's administration. Taiwan successively flew the flag of Qing, Japan, and the Republic of China. With Japan's rule, Taiwan's main trading partner turned from the Chinese mainland to Japan. Japan's products went through Taiwan to the Chinese mainland and Southeast Asia. After the opening of the Panama Canal, U.S. and Japan reinforced navigation over the Pacific Ocean. Taiwan's tea and camphor, which had previously gone through the Atlantic Ocean for sale to Europe and then to the United States, now went across the Pacific Ocean for sale to the United States. After the Pacific War outbreak, Taiwan's position as the center of the Greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere became transparent. This is the map provided by Asahi Shimbun in 1944. Taiwan's central position plus the post-war Cold War significantly influenced the signature of the 1952 Taipei Treaty between Japan and the ROC government. Based upon this treaty, which was registered in UN Treaty Series number 1858, Taiwan's full sovereignty transferred from the Qing to Japan was forwarded to the Republic of China in Taiwan. This is the cover of the treaty, and people who turned this treaty into force. And this is a place for the treaty to have been signed and turned effective. This is the Taipei Treaty's registration as number 1858 of UN's treaty series. From the previous discussion, it could be concluded with the following 2 points. From the much later rise of Taiwan relative to Ryukyu in the extended East Asian history and the trace of evidence gathered in this study, it is impossible that Yizhou and Liuqiu were Taiwan rather than Ryukyu. A center of a great East Asia shaped by Taiwan's long-term history by 1945 and its later state development was similar to Ryukyu's historical path from the 3rd century to the 16th century. Thank you indeed. So how much time I spent?
Oh, this is wonderful. You are well within your time limit, Professor Lin. Thank you.
Very good. I had been very nervous to cut the PowerPoint again and again.
It was perfect. And thank you so much for this really exceedingly rich and also very dense presentation. I think if some of you feel that...
I have to stop sharing. Okay, back to you.
Yes, I think if some of you feel that it was impossible to absorb, let alone digest all this knowledge in less than half an hour, I recommend that you go back to Professor Lin's and Mr. Huang's paper and read it. I also noticed that Mr. Huang Yi-chen is now among our attendees, and I would like to direct a special welcome to you, Professor Mr. Huang. I think we meet for the first time.
Yeah.
Now we have come to the time for our discussants, and I will first yield the floor to Professor Evan Dawley. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Loden, for your earlier very kind introduction and for turning things over to me. Thank you also to Auguste for organizing this whole event and to the ISDP for hosting it. Especially thanks to Professor Lin for her very rich paper and presentation, and again for inviting me to be one of the commentators. I'm glad to have this opportunity. And thanks to everyone who's here joining us, whatever time zone you happen to be in. Look forward to hearing some of your comments and questions as well. So I should say, add a little bit of introduction, or as Professor Loden's introduction suggested, I'm more of an expert in 20th century Taiwan and East Asia, but I have a strong interest in questions of sovereignty and jurisdiction and the historical origins of contemporary claims. And I have not, however, like Professor Lin has and Huang Yi-chen have, gone back and read the original texts or looked too deeply at the ancient maps. So I'm very glad that they have done so, because their research has been, in that regard, very successful, I think. But before I get to some comments on the paper, I do want to say that I approach this issue from a position of skepticism. Certainly not skepticism about Professor Lin and her research or this particular paper, but skepticism instead about 2 issues. One of which is that I'm skeptical that it is possible to be greatly certain about the correspondence between the names used in ancient texts and on ancient maps and the names that we use for places in the modern world. Ancient geography is filled with inaccuracies, and there are examples of both inconsistency and false consistency in names that are used. So I'm skeptical on that front. I'm also skeptical that even in cases where we can be very certain that there is a correspondence between an ancient name and a present name, that correspondence has a real bearing on contemporary claims of sovereignty, or it can be used to justify a contemporary claim. So that's what I mean by a position of skepticism. And again, some of that skepticism might come out of the fact that I have not read these ancient texts as Professor Lin and Huang Yi-chen have done. So I want to emphasize that one of the main points that comes out of their analysis of these old materials is that whatever chunks of land the ancient references to Yizhou and Liuqiu refer to, those chunks of land are unquestionably outside of China prior to 1684. Right, whether it was the Wu and Sui invasions, or if it was the descriptions of the cultures of Yizhou and Liuqiu that are very different than what we know about indigenous Taiwanese, or if it was, for example, the Ming dynasty's view that its administrative control ended at the coast, and its, if you will, defensive perimeter only extended as far as Penghu. In all of these cases, Yizhou, Liuqiu are outside of China's states. And this is a very important distinction to draw because of the argument that Professor Lin talked about in her comments, right? The Dervey thesis that Taiwan and Liuqiu are the same thing, because that thesis has become the basis for China to advance historic claims over Taiwan in the 20th and the 21st centuries. So distinguishing that is a very significant development. And of course, the paper and the presentation today goes much further than just saying that Liuqiu and Yizhou are outside of China, because they develop a really convincing argument about exactly where these ancient mariners and texts were referring to when they used the names Yizhou and Liuqiu. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Just want to draw attention to a few pieces of evidence that I thought were particularly significant in figuring out where these ancient things were referring to. Right, the fortifications that Professor Lin referred to in her presentation, the cave dwellings that show up in some of the ancient texts, right? These things were clearly not Taiwan and bear much closer resemblance to what we know about Ryukyu. Also, the types of alliances between the villages that are referred to in these ancient texts, the funerary practices. Again, these are not commensurate to what we know about Taiwan. I also want to emphasize that the point that we do have good evidence of long-term contacts between the Ryukyu Islands, the Ryukyu Kingdoms, and China and Japan, as well as to points much further south. But we do not have good evidence of Taiwan's interactions with any of these places between the 3rd century and the 16th century, if you will. So again, that distinction is important to emphasize. Maybe the final point that I want to emphasize about their analysis is a relatively small one that is made early on in the paper, but I think it's especially crucial from a historical perspective, which is the point about historical change, or change over time. Again, advocates for the Liuqiu or Yizhou as Taiwan thesis tend to emphasize similarities between customs that are practiced in Taiwan, or that they found practiced in Taiwan in the 17th and 18th centuries, and the descriptions in ancient texts. And they have also pointed to differences between what existed in Ryukyu in the Ming and the Qing periods and what is again in those ancient texts. And these advocates for the Dervey thesis have taken what was found in the Ming and the Qing eras, and they projected it backwards over 1,000 years to the Wu and the Sui accounts of these places. And that is, of course, problematic, right? We should not assume that there was no change over time. We should instead assume that there was change over time, and we can't just project these things backwards. And that brings me to the Dervey thesis. I don't need to go through it again because Professor Lin has just described it very well. I do want to emphasize that the evidence throughout this very rich paper really highlights the weakness of that thesis. And I want to point to one further weakness of that thesis, I think, which is that this thesis fits better, much better, with a particular European view of historical evolution that existed in the 19th century. It fits better with that view of history than it does with the evidence in the actual sources. This is, of course, the Enlightenment view of history, which I think I can express in maybe three ways very quickly here. One is that history is only the history of the nation state. Two, history is a narrative of progress, moving inexorably forward until it reached sort of a pinnacle in 19th century modernity. And then three, this is a history that occurred only, or at least first, in Europe, and that all other societies in the world were stagnant and unchanging until Europeans showed up to sort of drag them into modernity. And so I think that Dervey found one source, this 14th century text that he relied upon, that matched very well this view of a stagnant pre-modern world until Europe came along, and he used that text to maximum effect. So picking up there, I do have some questions that I'd like to pose for possible answers. So first is, why is it that the Dervey thesis or the Dervey-Schlegel thesis became so dominant? Particularly, why did it become so dominant in Japan and also in China? What did the Japanese scholars that are referred to in the paper, what did they gain from adopting this thesis? What did scholars in Republican China gain from this thesis, particularly since the government of China was not all that concerned with Taiwan for most of the Republican period? A second question has to do with the part of the paper that addresses the return of Taiwan into regional networks of trade and commerce during the 16th and 17th centuries. My question here is that as one of the maps that Professor Lin showed in her presentation, Ryukyu mariners and Japanese mariners, as they headed further south into Southeast Asia, would certainly have passed close to Taiwan. And they were doing that before the 16th and 17th centuries. So I'm curious as to whether or not there are texts from the Ryukyuan or the Japanese perspectives that talk about Taiwan as Taiwan. That would help us to clarify further the separation between Taiwan and Ryukyu. Maybe the last question that I'll ask here, so as not to take up too much more time, has to do with an even earlier period than the one addressed in the presentation. And so maybe it's a little bit outside of the paper, but as I was reading the paper and listening to the presentation, I did start to wonder about what about Han Dynasty texts and earlier texts? Did they maybe refer to what we now call Taiwan in this period before the 3rd century, when it was connected to coastal trading routes? That might again help us to better understand where Taiwan sits in the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, quite a remarkable comment. So when I could answer the question after August's question or now?
I originally we planned to have the two discussants make their comments first, but if August doesn't mind too much, I would like to. I think we can change that order and let.
Oh, no, it's better to have it two before my response. And then I have time to think more about the answer.
Okay. Then let me just say on a personal note that although I am myself shamefully ignorant of this subject, I must say that I very, very much appreciate Professor Dawley's skepticism and very sharp analysis. Not least in our era, when so much about history writing seems to be about constructing new narratives. I think you link up with a wonderful, with a tradition of historiography that I personally identify strongly with. But then, without further ado, I will yield the floor to August, please.
Thank you kindly, Torbjörn. I think, as mentioned on the note there of skepticism, I'm also glad that that this was mentioned by Evan, and that he brought truly a historian's rigor to this topic, which means that perhaps my perspective can be come from a different angle and be complementary, I hope. I would also like to preface my comments by saying that, of course, I'm also not an expert on this topic, and the Taiwan thesis and the Ryukyu thesis is contested, as is evident in Lin and Huang's paper, and my comments then should not be taken as an absolute endorsement of either or, although I have absolutely no reason to doubt Lin and Huang's work. So please let me not forget to mention thank you kindly, Lin, for such a fantastic presentation. I hope now that my comments, my reflections, and my questions can further stimulate the discussion today. So as has been mentioned a couple of times before, the basis for this roundtable discussion is Lin's paper, Lin and Huang's paper that they wrote together, and we were quite privileged that she wanted to publish it with us. And I would, as has been done before, encourage everyone tuning in today that is finding this discussion interesting to give it a read over at ISDP's website. So I think having read your paper and listening to your presentation today, which to some extent is an effort to rectify, as you see it, the academic fallacies which led to this influence of the Taiwan thesis, or Dervey thesis, that Taiwan is Liuqiu and Yizhou. I think it's a very important reminder of the significance of the work that historians do. I think we are in essence talking about how the work of influential historians can create ripple effects for generations that create lasting paradigms. I noted that you mentioned in your paper that the Taiwan Liuqiu thesis became so influential in Japan around 1920s that it was written in middle school literature, if I'm not mistaken. And today, of course, it's used to underpin the PRC's claim that Taiwan has been part of China since ancient times. And I can't help but think that this discussion about information and how it spreads is perhaps of more relevance today than ever, as the policymakers and the educated public face the challenges associated with the internet. I'm thinking of disinformation. I'm thinking of malignly constructed narratives and society's psychological defense, which are things that we discuss very much here over at ISDP. I think your paper and today's discussion is a testament that history, the discipline of history, should not just be relegated to discussions between historians, because historical narratives are, I think, more extant than ever and can have very real implications, as your example expertly shows. And it is, of course, used differently by different actors. So for Taiwan, the historical narrative that Taiwan and Liuqiu are one and the same has a substantial weight behind it, because, as mentioned, it is linked to the PRC's claim that that Taiwan has been part of China since ancient times. I think many are familiar with this phrasing from the PRC, that Taiwan has been part of China since ancient times. I think a lot less people are aware that the Taiwan is Liuqiu thesis is the basis for that claim in the PRC's white papers on unification with Taiwan. I think that the presentation today and the article that it is based on show quite expertly how the complexities that are actually behind such a reductive statements like those found in the white papers, and that this has historically been contested and continues to be contested by the work we are discussing today, does not have any room in these white papers. And it is an important reminder that not all state actors play by the same rules when it comes to retelling history. I would say myself that this example, from my perspective, is fairly indicative of how the PRC can use history, particularly when it comes to strengthening its narrative control over Taiwan. But I think it's also somewhat indicative of how the PRC uses history more generally as a tool to build a consensus around its strategic positions. In this sense, by a political goal. And I would be curious to hear what Lin and our speakers today think about that. So, in relation to the PRC's white papers, I'm curious, and perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on this note, Lin. Because I also read your contribution to Torbjörn Lodén and Bo Junjing's ISDP special paper on assessing the development of Taiwanese identity, which was also related to this topic. And you make reference there to the white papers. And to my understanding, Liuqiu was mentioned as being the Taiwan of ancient times along with Yizhou previously. But to my understanding, in the most recent white paper, the Taiwan question and China reunification in the new era, only Liuqiu is mentioned as having been the Taiwan of ancient times, if my observation is correct. And I'd be very curious to know why Yizhou was omitted in the most recent one. And I am wondering if you have any insight there. I also noted on, I think, a final note on my part. I noted in your paper, which I think is quite interesting, that there have been PRC proponents of the Ryukyu thesis. I think you mentioned, for example, in your paper, Mi Qingyu as having been aligned to some extent, at least, with the Ryukyu thesis. But I also noted when reading that the reference there was from work in the late 90s, and I'd be very curious if there is room for a Ryukyu thesis in the PRC in this new era, so to speak. I think my own impression is perhaps that history and historical narratives are deemed so important by the government that the control is exerted over it, and that historians in this regard can face quite a bit of pressure. But I'd be very curious to hear what impressions you have on this. And I think I will leave it to Lin to now start responding. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
August,
Thank
for
you.
another set of interesting comments and questions. So now the floor is yours, Professor Lin. You have several questions to deal with.
Because the memory of August's comment is fresh, so let me respond by beginning from answering August's question. Actually, I didn't read into it. The first version, so the white paper had Yizhou and Liuqiu. Actually, the second version didn't have it at all. And the third version, I suppose both Yizhou and Ryukyu were there. I didn't notice that Yizhou disappeared. I didn't know the reason why there's this difference. It's worthwhile to figure out later. And for PRC's proponents, Mi Qingyu, we just find his information from the web. He used to have a job, has some position, official position. Later, seems not. So we don't know this scholar. Yeah, in fact, I'm associated with PRC's historians very much, because the opportunity to study Harvard is because when I went to Harvard, that's the first year PRC scholars were allowed to be visitors, visiting scholars at Harvard. So I was quite associated with the PRC's historians. So far, I didn't know Mi Qing is the situation about Mi Qing. But this paper, in my acknowledgement, in the long paper published by ISDP, in my acknowledgement, I acknowledge the history, the Taiwan Institute of Taiwan Studies at Xiamen University very much. Because you might just feel that this kind of study might not be welcomed by PRC. Actually, I don't think it's much welcome by Taiwan, to speak honestly. My first presentation took place in the Xiamen University, the Institute of Taiwan Studies. They were happy to have that presentation in Chinese, of course, and the chair of that presentation is Dang Shuji of that university, and he was very nice for my presentation, and he just admitted that, well, they have neglect to study in this area. And the audience was big, and the organizer was happy that for usually for historical lecture, they would not gather so many crowds. For that presentation, there's a bigger crowd, including scholars from Fuzhou. Fuzhou is quite far from Xiamen. And the lecture was announced just in a very short period because I attended in a conference nearby, not nearby, somewhere between Fujian and Guangdong, and Xiamen is in some distance from there. And they invite me on the conference, so it might take just 2 days because right after the conference, I gave my presentation, and then they gave a huge audience, and the audience comment is very fruitful for my study, for Evan's question about skepticism for the ancient text. Actually, I dropped the distance information in the Yizhou study because someone said that that distance might not be so precise. And so in my paper or presentation, I dropped that kind of information. But for direction, our work is on direction, right? Southeast to Linhai's seat. The Chinese civilization has the compass knowledge from quite early periods. So for me, the direction knowledge might be more acceptable even in modern period. So we follow the southeastern direction, and for the ancient names and contemporary names, actually at the very beginning for introducing Ryukyu Islands, I cut the more explanation because for the coverage of Ryukyu Islands, it changes. For example, when the Ryukyu Kingdom was on its peak, its territory was extended to Amami Islands and Miyako and Yama, the southern part of today's Ryukyu, today's Okinawa prefecture. So and the territory often changes, so the coverage could not be that fixed. So I would try to be more precise, but sometimes it would not be so possible to be precise for every items. And as for Evans referring to the Enlightenment historical viewpoints, I thank for this kind of deep comment because really when I read David's view about the Liuqiu people's cannibalism, it's really understood along the line of progress in this school of history. And as for the Japanese scholars' reason to be affected by David's Taiwan thesis so much, a friend of mine used to have the term that European hegemony, knowledge hegemony, for this kind of a phenomenon, because it's quite difficult to get evidence for this kind of interpretation. So I also skip it. And the Japanese Ryukyu thesis scholar would say, because they are skeptical for David's thesis, they provided their reason. that European hegemony in knowledge is one of them. The other is Japan's eagerness to understand the newly obtained colony. So they would like it to understand more about Taiwan and in the rough absorption of related knowledge. They just pick it up too directly. That's another interpretation provided by Japanese Ryukyu thesis followers. Okay, so for what? For the relation between any document about the relation between Taiwan and Ryukyu, because Ryukyu itself didn't have a writing system. They don't remain documents before the establishment of the Ryukyu Kingdom. Ryukyu Kingdom being Ming and Qing dynasties vassal state, they followed to use Chinese documents. And for this kingdom, they have remained the so-called valuable documents for the various reigns, 历代保案. Hamashita Sensei has summarized the trade networks of Ryukyu by basing upon these documents. In his last lecture in Academia Sinica, he mentioned that there's some spot of Taiwan has been a stepstone for Ryukyu's trade networks with Philippines. And what's the exact spot today? What's the exact name of today for that spot? Hamashita Sensei could not reply precisely. Maybe because that's along the eastern part of Taiwan. So there are many small ports on this coast, and so the deepest harbor is Su'ao. So I have been guessing whether Su'ao will be the link between Ryukyu and Manila. So that's just for guessing. So far, I still don't have any answer. So thank you for all these questions, good questions, and for August skepticism about the politicians and the scholars. We have to face it for every generations of people, right? But it's very difficult. But we still have to make it up better the situation as possible as being an academic people. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself. Sorry for taking up the time for this. I think we have now really, thank you so much for these incisive comments, Professor Lin. I think we have now reached the final stage of this round table where we can invite questions from the audience. But before opening up the floor totally, may I turn to Mr. Huang Yi-chen and ask you, as the co-author of Professor Lin, would you like to add something to the discussion or to the presentation? You don't have to, but if you feel like it, you are more than welcome. No? Well, if not, we open up the floor for questions. Should you or I, August, moderate this? Perhaps you are more apt in that you know more people here.
Thank you very much, Torbjörn. I am not sure if I have some trouble seeing the Q&A
That's why I turn to you, actually, if I may interrupt you.
function, but I think again, as Torbjörn mentioned, the floor is now open for questions, and I'm happy to assist you, Torbjörn, in moderating this.
Sorry, we have to, no, I think we have got two questions.
Now it seems, but I think perhaps because I was very interested, and maybe if I'm allowed, I was very interested in Lin's reply, and maybe if I could pick up on something before we take those questions.
Give this opportunity to Evan as well.
I think so. I think so. So I was very, very interested to find that actually in your experience, Lin, your research actually found a welcoming audience in the PRC. I thought that was very interesting to hear. And perhaps a little bit contrary to my expectation, actually. So I thought that was very interesting. I also cannot help but to probe a little bit, because you said that if I heard you correctly, you said that actually maybe hasn't been so welcomed in Taiwan, and I'd be amiss if I didn't ask you to elaborate a little bit. Is that your experience, that maybe it's been a little bit more welcomed in the PRC?
For Taiwan, the situation is they particularly in academic syndicum. They will not connect academic work with the contemporary issue at all for the historical study, and for the because this is related with international relations, and scholars on this field usually don't take up history very much. That's the situation. And you mentioned of a white paper. Actually, my personal background for getting into this topic is because that white paper is so important for Taiwan. But few of Taiwan's contemporary scholars on the relationship between Taiwan and Chinese mainland has discussed the white paper, and it's because of my service at the Mainland Affairs Council, as I was just invited as an on the advisory committee, and the role is just to have meetings once every month, and at the invitation they say you just need to come whenever you have something to speak up. So maybe I went there once every 4 months. But then that experience really affected my extending my historical study to connect with the current affair, because my service in that council was in between 1996 and 2000. And 1997 is for Hong Kong. 1999 is for Macau. So when I was on that meeting, that advisory council, and the chair of that council was very nervous about Taiwan's situation. Whether Taiwan will be in the next Hong Kong or Macau. That's the situation even up to now, right? So then I will, and then I feel that even I don't feel comfortable by reading the white paper. They this is discussed once in the council. I didn't have much opinion to respond to that white paper. As for the Hong Kong Macau operation, then it occurs to me it's related to my field. I'm from Institute of Modern History. Both Hong Kong's situation and the Macau situation is related to the treaties covered by the modern history. So and no other colleagues on that committee was from history. So I feel that it's my own responsibility to take it up. So the reason why I touch upon treaty today and in the end is because of that background.
Thank you very much. And Professor Dawley, would you also like to make some comments on Professor Lin's answer?
No, I very much appreciated the answers. I should say that the skepticism that I have when I began reading the paper, I'm much less skeptical about the possibility of finding correspondence between ancient names, at least for some places, and present usage. But I will add one of the reasons that I'm more convinced that I do want to add one final comment about the paper, strength of the paper, which is this point that at times, Liuqiu might have included parts of Taiwan, right? This is, again, the historical change. The knowledge was not precise in the past the way it is today with our Google Maps and whatnot. And so, yeah, there probably were some people who sailed past, Hupingdao, what is now Hupingdao, or past Geelong, and said, oh, that's Liuqiu, because they didn't always know. And so there's this expansive vision of Liuqiu that extends all the way perhaps from the southern coast of Kyushu at times to parts of Taiwan. And that is actually part of the vagueness that is present in historical knowledge that distinguishes it from the present. But I don't want to go any further because I see there are questions.
Thank you. Anyway, I think your skeptical attitude is wonderful and very, very valuable for the discussion. Shall we try to deal with, we now have 3 questions at least. Shall I read the first question and ask for you, Professor Lin, and for the discussants? An anonymous attendee writes as follows: has there been any cultural exchange of visits to Taiwan from either the Chinese or the Ryukyu Islanders prior to the establishment of the first Han-Chinese trade posts settlements in the 16th century? Was there a particular reason for Taiwan, a quite large island, being more or less isolated until then? Oh, these are big questions, I suppose. Would you care to comment, Professor Lin? You can also read.
I have no answer so far because for that period, I'm actually not very expert. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone? Professor Dawley, would you like to say something?
I'll just say very, very quickly that prior to about the 2nd or 3rd century, Taiwan, particularly I think Western Taiwan, there was a lot of coastal trade across the Taiwan Straits. And it was also indigenous Taiwanese were also connected to trade routes to the Philippines and as far away as Vietnam. So there was earlier commerce and interaction. And I have been wondering for a little while now where those interactions went, why Taiwan fell out of those regional networks around the 2nd or 3rd century. The rise of the overland Silk routes that the paper suggests, that Professor Lin suggested in the paper in the presentation, I'm sure that's part of it, but there have to be other reasons why those cross-coastal trade disappeared. Because there really seems to have been nothing from that point until the 15th, 16th century.
May I answer?
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Actually, this is explained in the paper rather than today's presentation. the interaction, the exchange between Taiwan and the Philippines mostly took place before the 3rd century. And then after that, because the other areas have a more valuable exchange, and then Taiwan could not provide comparably valuable goods. That's what the Zhu Banzi say about the situation of Taiwan. And when mentioned about the Zhu Banzi, actually we discussed in the paper that that the Liuqiu could cover Taiwan. Actually, it's a problem it's a reason to confuse this issue, because Liuqiu sometimes denoted to both Taiwan and Liuqiu in some historical period. That's the reason for the confusion. But when Taiwan was and Liuqiu were mixed up, Liuqiu was still more important than Taiwan. Taiwan, and then in Taiwan there's a small Liuqiu at present. Yeah. And according to some Japanese scholar, that was when the European navigators headed for Liuqiu, and then they anchored at Taiwan, and then later they found out that it's not the Liuqiu itself, so call it Xiao Liuqiu. Yeah, small Liuqiu. Yeah. And we have so many archaeological discovery in recent years. So the discovery so far still shows that there's not much external relation after the 3rd century. So Cao Yonghe's view for Taiwan still stands for us. Yeah.
Thank you. We have also received a question which is not really related, I think, to today's presentation, but since it deals with modern China, and you, Professor Lin, come from the Institute for Modern Chinese History, perhaps I can still read the question. Does the PRC, the People's Republic of China, view the events of the Cultural Revolution in a similar way that the Taiwanese view the White Terror? Has there been some sort of acknowledgement of past atrocities or any attempts to shift the narrative to suit the CCP's needs, the Chinese Communist Party's needs? Do you feel like you don't have to comment on this, Professor Lin, because it's really outside the scope of your presentation, but you are most welcome to do so if you wish.
No. I'm not. I'm not good to answer that question. Yeah, sorry.
I understand that, and I'm afraid our final question is of a similar nature. August, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you, Torbjörn. Well, I will admit that myself, I had the question in the back of my mind when reading the long paper and listening to the presentation. Which others did as well, that there can be this confusion between a relatively large mass of land and significantly smaller. But I think that reading your long paper in more detail, it will provide the answers to the extent that it is possible. I think maybe something that I'm interested in and that we, I think, haven't not necessarily touched on in detail is that for for the people listening, I think they may be curious about the methodology. It's a part of your paper, and it is that you are bringing new technology to something that you know, it wasn't necessarily available before. Am I correct?
Yeah, the time needed, because well, we could not complain that way, because the problem of his not using the Book of Sui. It's a problem for scholars of that generation. It's very difficult and very expensive to gather ancient books here and there worldwide in the generation. And now we could locate so many ancient texts worldwide just in our office computer. So it's different. The difference between us and the previous scholars is because of this general technological difference. We are lucky to be in our age.
Well, thank you very much. Before I say some few words in conclusion, I would again turn to our main speaker, Professor Lin, and also to Professor Dawley from the US. And August, would you like to add some very brief final comments? Evan?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to get in front of Professor Lin if you've got a final word, or maybe we should leave you with the final word. And I'll just say one thing very quickly about the confusion of between Taiwan and Liuqiu. On the one hand, I think it's unlikely, as I said, that mariners from Japan, even from the China coast, would have really confused Liuqiu with Taiwan if they actually landed there and interacted with people, because they, I think, knew a fair amount about Liuqiu and the Ryukyu Kingdom a little later. And they would have known that it was not Taiwan. But if we think about just mariners just trying to get from one point to another, I know a little bit about the navigation techniques in the Song and early Ming period and Yuan period. You know, they had written charts that told them to go in a certain direction for a certain number of days and then change direction. So if they were approaching a landmass, they didn't know how big it was, right? Unless they were actually going to try to sail all the way around Taiwan, and that would have taken a very long time, and the winds would have prevented it. So they didn't really know where they were approaching, I think, in a lot of cases. And so that's where some of this confusion comes from. And that's, I think, in some ways why the textual evidence describing the cultural features or the alliances or the archaeological evidence is so important. And that's, I want to emphasize that in the paper one more time.
Well, then we are really approaching the end of this roundtable, which I think has been really great, quite wonderful. This is an example, to my mind, of independent, solid scholarship on a historical issue that is not really political at all, but which has been used for political purposes. And I'm full of admiration for Professor Lin and Mr. Huang for producing such a piece of solid, independent scholarship on a historical issue and staying away from politics. The relationship between the content of your paper and contemporary issues is very loose. There are no, as I see it, necessary relations at all. And I very much hope that this scholarly attitude, which of course is not new in Greater China, I come to think of Mr. Chen Yin-Chue, who spoke about the importance of independent spirit and free thinking, 独立之精神, 自由之思想, a century ago. So with this, and even earlier than that, we had similar ideas. But in the contemporary world, there is too little of this kind of really, truly truth-seeking scholarship. So, on behalf of the ISDP, and I think August shares this with me, we are very proud that you have chosen to publish this important issue here. And also I would like to urge, in terms of ideology and politics, I would like to urge the audience not to jump to political conclusions on the basis of this. This is pure scholarship, and it's extremely valuable for culture, especially for Chinese and Taiwanese culture, but also for all of us. This kind of scholarship we need in Europe, in the US, in Asia, and in the Chinese world, not least in these days, where these kind of values are really threatened. So now at the very end, I would again like to thank you all so much, especially our guest speakers, and not least August, who together with your colleagues have organized this seminar, and my gratitude to ISDP for hosting it. And last but not least, thank you to all of the attendees who took time to log in today. So thank you so much, and very much looking forward to keeping in touch with as many as possible of you. All the very best, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This has entirely been our privilege. Thank you so much.